X-Men Days of Future Past is a super important movie in the franchise in a lot of ways. It's the sequel to X-Men First Class, which brought the series in a radical new direction after it had faltered with some poor decisions, taking a risky gamble on a prequel and having it really pay off. So, they really want to continue with that positive energy. Then it's also a sequel of sorts to The Wolverine, which also set this movie up in the stinger of that movie, with Wolverine reuniting with a now-alive Professor X and Magneto, who warned him that the dark forces were approaching. And finally, it's also a hard reboot to the series, using a time travel plot to split the timeline into two separate lines, one of which gets erased by the end, making it some of the more questionable decisions that were made are basically not canon anymore. Also, after The Wolverine, this is actually the second time that I'm reviewing the middle part of a kind of trilogy last, as I had already covered First Class in a previous feature, and Apocalypse when it came out. Days of Future Past starts in a far-flung future where mutants are almost completely wiped out, and a few straggler X-Men are fighting a losing battle against Sentinels that can adapt to their power. They move from place to place until the Sentinels show up, then use time travel to go back and be elsewhere. They form a plot to send one of their number, Wolverine, back in time to the 1970s to prevent the war from ever happening, by stopping Mystique from murdering Bolivar Trask, the creator of the Sentinels, which martyred him and made the Trask Corporation get an important government contract to build the Sentinels, and Mystique's dark path would lead to her own powers being used to create the super adaptable Sentinels that are currently killing off mutants by the buttload. So Wolverine goes back in time to the 70s, essentially possessing his younger body, and finds everything in disarray, with Professor X having been crippled by the end of the last film. Beast developed a serum that allows Xavier to walk, but robs him of his powers. He can stop taking the serum at any time and get his powers back, but then he's confined to a wheelchair. Xavier uses the serum almost like a drug and is pretty strung out and depressed over losing his powers. His friend Magneto's gone down a darker path. His childhood friend Mystique also went with Magneto down that dark path. So when Wolverine shows up, he's pretty dismissive of the whole saving the future thing. Wolverine manages to arrange a situation where he could reach through time and have Charles speak to his older self for a bit of motivation, and they start working on putting the team back together to prevent Mystique from murdering Trask, which includes rescuing Magneto from an underground prison, as he was believed to have been behind the Kennedy assassination. Some of the mutants from the last film are here, of course. We get some new faces, such as Quicksilver, who is just intensely entertaining for the brief period that he's around, and some of the future X-Men, such as Sunspot, Blink, and Bishop, are pretty interesting, at least visually, though we don't get a lot of them. The future scenes are mostly mugged by Xavier, Magneto, Storm, and Kitty Pryde. So it's a very Wolverine-centric movie as well, with him being the main character that bridges together the two time periods. Now, as I pointed out with Men in Black 3, time travel plots make less sense the more you think about them, but this one is actually handled really well. Sadly, Matthew Vaughn did not return to direct this one. However, Bryan Singer returns to the franchise after having directed the first two X-Men films and producing a bunch more of them. And you know what? Say what you will about what a fucked up pervert he is, he does know how to make a very good film. Days of Future Past has tons of heart, its sentimental touch to the characters, its epic scope, the large cast, which is handled well, and a really fantastic score make this every bit as good as First Class. Almost. Yeah, there's a few little nagging flaws, mainly that a lot of the future characters that I mentioned previously are really just there to look cool. They don't get any lines in some cases, and the main villain, Trask, is played by Peter Dinklage. He's extremely underutilized. I felt almost ripped off on that front. If you get an actor on the level of Peter Dinklage, you either have to use him a lot, or if he's only around for a few scenes, really make them count. And I felt that he was kind of squandered in this one. That's really it for criticisms, though. This one comes highly recommended. It's not as perfect as First Class, but it's the realization of an extremely ambitious product that panned out extremely well. 9 out of 10.